Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're investigating what I like to call the ultimate heist, the complete and total theft of your earliest memories. I mean, think about it. You lived through thousands of hours of vivid experiences during those first few years of your life, but somehow, almost every single trace of that time has been totally wiped clean from your conscious mind. So today, we're going to solve this mystery and find out exactly what happened to those missing years. So let's dive right into this existential mystery. Where did your first 3 years go? You know the feeling. You look at old childhood photos of yourself on your first birthday, covered in cake, surrounded by your family, and you draw an absolute blank. It's literally as if it happened to a completely different person. And as we'll see when we look at how your brain physically rewired itself during early memory formation, it raises a really fascinating question. If your mind was disassembled and rebuilt, is the baby in those family photos even you?
Now, over a century ago, Sigmund Freud actually gave this strange phenomenon a name. He called it infantile amnesia, basically describing our total failure of memory for those first few years. And for decades after Freud, scientists just assumed that babies were essentially blank slates. The prevailing thought was that infant brains were simply too undeveloped, too immature to actually encode and store complex information. But was that really true?
Section 1. Do babies actually remember?
Well, to solve a memory heist, we first have to prove there was actually something there to steal, right? Back in the 1980s, psychologist Caroline Révé-Collier ran this absolutely brilliant, elegant experiment. She tied a little ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile hanging above their crib. The babies quickly learned that kicking made the mobile move, and they loved it. But here is the amazing part. When she brought those same babies back days later, they remembered. They started kicking immediately. Even 2-month-olds held that memory for a couple of days, and 6-month-olds remembered for weeks. This proved for sure that infant brains can absolutely learn, store, and recall information.
Fast forward to today, and the evidence is even more wild. A groundbreaking 2025 study out of Yale University managed to use highly advanced fMRI scans on awake infants, which, by the way, is notoriously difficult to do because babies don't exactly like to sit still. But they showed these babies novel images and measured the activity in their hippocampus. And what they found was that the infant brain is actively and robustly encoding memories long before they can even speak a single word. So the memories are definitely being made. And what's super fascinating here is the contrast in the types of memories they're forming. On one hand, you have statistical learning. This is the brain extracting general patterns from the world, like learning a bath time routine, and it uses the anterior part of the hippocampus. But the Yale study proved babies are also doing episodic memory encoding in the posterior hippocampus. This is the ability to save specific, vivid events, like exactly what happened when grandma visited or a walk in the rain. Babies are doing both, and much earlier than we ever thought. Section 2. How brains build memories.
So researchers from the University of Bologna actually mapped out exactly how a child's memory matures over time. It's kind of like building a house. It starts at the top with perceptual visual fragments, just isolated sensory images, like the flash of a bright red toy. Then it builds into general semantic memory, which is factual knowledge without a specific context. As the brain develops, it starts forming episodic fragments, then repeated episodes, like the daily routine of going to preschool. And finally, it culminates in a single episodic event, a complete, organized memory with a specific space and time context. Eventually, this episodic system just takes over as the main organizer of our experiences.
Section 3. The cost of growing brains.
Okay, so if these complex memories are successfully being built by the time we're toddlers, who or what is stealing them away from us as we grow older? This glossary from a McGill University study gives us our first major suspect. Our brains don't just passively lose information, they actually perform active forgetting and decay. During certain sleep phases, the brain actively clears out irrelevant information and downregulates synaptic connections. Since a baby is taking in a massive amount of new, unfiltered data every single day, this automated decay process systematically removes waste so the system just doesn't overload. But wait, here is the absolute plot twist when it comes to early childhood. In the first years of life, your hippocampus is pumping out new neurons at an explosive rate, a process called neurogenesis. These new neurons integrate into your existing brain circuits to help you learn and grow. But in doing so, they physically disrupt and overwrite the existing connections, literally the very connections that were holding your earliest memories. And a fascinating 2014 study out of Toronto actually confirmed this highly counterintuitive truth. They ran experiments on mice and found that artificially increasing neurogenesis in adult mice caused them to forget things they had just learned. Conversely, when they slowed down neurogenesis in infant mice, those infants preserved their early memories much longer than normal. So the crucial takeaway here is that your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold memories. It was simply too busy building new rooms and tearing down old walls to keep them intact.
Moving on to Section 4, Language, Self, and Culture.
Because, biology isn't the only culprit here. Psychology plays a massive role in infantile amnesia. To have an autobiographical memory, basically to be the main character of a memory you can consciously replay in your head, you need these 3 prerequisites. Yes, you need the biological maturation of your central nervous system, but you also need a language framework to organize the memory. And most importantly, you need a developed sense of self. You have to understand that you exist as a continuous person, separate from the world around you. In your earliest years, that narrator inside your head, packaging your experiences, it just didn't exist yet.
Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson hit the nail on the head with this. She said, "Language gives memory a skeleton. Without it, experiences are like water with no container." I just love that analogy. Before you could speak, your experiences were just raw sensory impressions, sounds, textures, emotions. But without words to organize them into a narrative structure, those impressions really had nothing to attach to. They existed purely in the moment, and then they slipped away.
Plus, your environment deeply impacts this whole process. Research highlights some really stark cultural differences when it comes to infantile amnesia. In Western cultures, where parents often have very narrative-heavy conversations with their kids about the past, our earliest memories tend to form around age 3.5. But in the Maori culture of New Zealand, which places a massive emphasis on strong oral history and personal storytelling, average first memories reach all the way back to age 2.5. The way your culture talks about the past literally shapes the timeline of your own memory. Which brings us to Section 5. Are the memories really gone?
So, we've figured out why we can't consciously access our baby years. Rapid brain growth overwrote the circuits, and we lack the language to anchor them. But there's one final twist in our detective story. The latest research from Yale points to something called the retrieval failure theory. Because we now know infants as young as 4 months show strong episodic encoding, scientists believe that infantile amnesia might actually not be a failure of storage, it might be a failure of retrieval. As your brain remodeled itself, those foundational memories didn't necessarily vanish into thin air. They might still be persisting, encoded deep inside the brain's architecture. We just lost the biological keys to consciously access them.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought to ponder. Are your missing baby memories truly gone forever? Or are they just locked away, forming the invisible foundation of who you've become? Even if you can't remember the exact events, the emotions, the attachments, and the raw experiences of those first few years quietly shaped your developing brain, and they continue to shadow who you are today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the mysteries of your own mind.